Boris Johnson, the British Prime Minister, has announced that all COVID restrictions are now over and the Biden administration are no longer publishing daily coronavirus figures. Does this mean that coronavirus is no longer an issue, or does it mean that coronavirus is being mobilized and utilized for political expediency and perhaps has been previously? Hello there, you 4.7 million awakening wonders resisting the constant restrictions and regulations and attempts to turn you into a conditioned citizen, remaining responsible, compassionate and fair, listening to other people, remaining open-hearted and brave. That's how I think of you. By God, I hope it's how you think of me. What is going on in the world? In the UK, where I live and am indeed from, coronavirus restrictions are mostly being eliminated now and ultimately removed within a few weeks. Biden's administration over in America is now not publishing coronavirus figures. For what reason? Why? What was the point of it in the first place? So many questions come from that. And Australia is basically a prison colony again. So what's happening around coronavirus? Is it being utilized for political gain? Has it always been utilized for political gain? Is there a symbolic component to coronavirus when all the while we've been told it's about science? Now, of course, as you know, this remains an incredibly sensitive issue. There's no doubt that many people's lives have been hugely impacted medically, politically, socially, psychologically, and I don't claim to be an expert in anything other than my own thoughts, and most of the time I'm guessing what they are. So let's have a look at these news stories and see together whether we believe that it means the narrative is crumbling, COVID is being used symbolically and politically, and also what I think isn't that bloody important, is it actually? What you think is important, and I want to know in the comments below. Are you worried about these regulations changing? What are your feelings about the utility of coronavirus and the pandemic and subsequent regulation? All of this, you can let me know what you feel below, and it's better for me if you subscribe as well, so consider doing that if you don't already. Now let's see what's in the news with these famous bits of paper of mine. You all right, old woodshed? Boris Johnson has announced the end of all COVID measures introduced to combat the Omicron variant, compulsory mask wearing on public transport and in shops, guidance to work from home, and vaccine certificates from next week. What I suppose is fascinating about that is that many people will welcome the relief. I think a lot of people feel a fatigue around coronavirus and a frustration, and people want to just get on with their lives. I know a lot of people think, and in fact, I think Saeed Javid said, this is going to be something that we have to live with. But there will be other people that feel deeply concerned, and there will be legitimacy to those concerns. Perhaps you're a health worker who's been hit up by it, although I know there's a variety of opinions in that particular sector. And certainly it seems there's a great deal of social tension. And there was a lot of social tension anyway. And perhaps coronavirus and the differing opinions and views around it have led to an increase in social tension, social conflict, and general disease, as well as the impacts of the condition itself. To cheers from some on the Conservative benches, Johnson announced an immediate end to the need for pupils to wear masks at secondary schools. Now, this is significant, of course, because those of you that follow the news, and I hope that's all of you, although you might think it's propaganda and don't bother watching it, will know that Boris Johnson is experiencing a significant political crisis because of the revelation that he can barely go half hour without having some sort of party, an excessive amount of party, like it's some frat house instead of an actual seat of government. Parties literally every day, some really mental stuff, people breaking swings, bring your own booze, stuff that I don't think would be acceptable under any conditions, and it brings about a lot of questions. Boris Johnson did have coronavirus. Why are they not concerned about the spread of coronavirus among themselves and their impact among themselves? There's a lot of questions around that, and of course, importantly, the hypocrisy of implementing rules that you're not prepared to obey yourself. And something as significant as this obviously will alter the narrative, and this idea that coronavirus has a narrative impact as well as a practical, medical and regulatory one is something that we're examining. While Johnson's statement will please a number of his backbenchers, it prompted concern from teaching and health unions and from NHS and public health representatives. Certainly, I hope what this heralds is a more open debate around coronavirus and a more reasoned conversation about the multivalent impact of such a complex new phenomena. And the censorship around it, it seems to me, does it to you, that there has been some censorship around it, I don't think is helpful in creating an environment where people with with diverse requirements, diverse needs, different concerns, different health histories, different social histories, different ethnic and economic backgrounds have to come together as various nations and find a consensus. That surely must be our aim going forward. Otherwise, what the bloody hell is a society? What is a civilization if none of us care about one another? But what's going on over there in what I assume to be, because I look at the analytics, your country, America, under Joe Biden, who has ceased to publish the daily coronavirus figures. Now, to find this little article, we had to do considerable research. That in itself is interesting. The coronavirus deaths and infections and cases is not going to run like a ticker tape across the bottom of your news anymore. Why not? And why was it in the first place? Those are important questions. What is the political dimension to coronavirus and how coronavirus is utilized? Because I think you and I would want that the only consideration is how can we help people? How can we take care of people? We have differing needs and requirements. Some people seem to be very vulnerable, others less so. There are a variety of conditions and considerations, even outside of health, economic ones, financial ones, social ones, psychological. I mean, there's so much to consider. Are we being honest, authentic, and transparent? The US federal government will no longer require hospitals to report the number of people who die from COVID-19 every day, according to new guidelines from the US Department of Health and Human Services. On January 6, the HHS published updated guidelines on which information hospitals provide to the agency. The guidelines note that retirement of fields which are no longer required to be reported, among which is previous days COVID-19 deaths. The guidelines note this field has been made inactive for the federal data collection. Hospitals no longer need to report these data elements to the federal government. This change goes into effect on February the 2nd. So that's a change, and a change is a decision, and a decision is based on reasons. What are the reasons? On Friday afternoon, Dr. Jorge Caballero, a medical doctor and clinical instructor at Stanford University, wrote, "I'd love to understand why the federal government will no longer require hospitals to report the daily number of COVID-19 deaths as of February the 2nd. The same day the HHS published the update guidance, Dr. Ezekiel Emanuel, a former Biden administration COVID-19 advisor, published an article in the Journal of American Medical Association, JMA, calling on governments to retire the reporting of deaths from COVID-19. Emanuel's call for a new normal was hailed with an editorial of the Washington Post and a lead interview on NBC's Meet the Press, the most prominent of the US Sunday talk shows. Commentators responded with outrage. "The US government doesn't want us to know how many of us are dying," wrote Chris Richards in a comment that received 1,500 likes. Thousands of commentators voiced their outrage that after promising to follow the science, the Biden administration has taken an action that smacks of efforts to cover up the pandemic. Or if not cover up the pandemic, reframe the consequences of the pandemic and the way that that information has been used. Regardless, the reporting by Caballero and the WSWS stands. On February the 2nd, hospitals will no longer be required to report COVID-19 deaths directly to the federal government, and such data will depend on state governments that are themselves moving to shut down reporting. I suppose the question that looms large is, why are these changes being made? Is it to change the perception of coronavirus? Is it to change the perception of the impact of it? And what would motivate that? Could it be that Joe Biden is suffering from terrible public perception and is deeply unpopular? Let's have a look. After winning more votes than any presidential candidate in American history, stop it, Biden is now, just 12 months later, one of the country's most unpopular presidents. For months, Biden's approval ratings have languished in the mid to low 40s with an average approval rating of 42%. A Quinnipiac poll released last week found him at a dire 33%. So what it seems to me, and these are of course just my intuitive feelings and opinions, is that we are entering a new phase around the coronavirus. Different attitudes are starting to emerge. I am of course still not in an opinion because of my obligations as a broadcaster and my understanding of how the various media I operate within work, at liberty to say what my personal opinions are, and why would you care anyway? But what it feels like to me is that we're entering a new phase where politicians are now seeing that there is a requirement to alter regulation and legislation, either for personal popularity or different types of political expedience. I suppose at a time where many of us don't trust our leaders, don't trust the media, don't trust big business, don't trust big pharma, when we see changes, there is a degree of circumspection, consideration, rumination, and even doubt about the intentions. What seems to me to be important is that at a time where some leaders are beleaguered, one because he thinks he's going to be ousted because of a lack of popularity, Biden, one who seems on the edge of being forced to resign because of what seems like hypocrisy, and indeed, God, it's difficult to argue with that, are using coronavirus for political ends. That begs the question, has coronavirus always been used for political ends? I'm not making medical assertions, legal assertions, regulatory assertions. I'm just saying that when there are many, many variables, what's the impact of lockdown on mental health? What's the impact of lockdown and hospitalizations on various other conditions, cancer, heart disease, etc.? What would it be like if we funded healthcare differently and better? Would we then be able to deal with pandemics and conditions of this nature? I'm not commenting on those variables. There's one variable though that does seem to make an impact: political expedience. When coronavirus can be used for leverage or advantage by these political leaders, it seems they're willing to make the moves that advantage their cause. That seems apparent in my opinion. But what do you think? That's just what I reckon. Let me know in the comments below. Subscribe to my channel. Give this video a like. It really helps me when you engage with the content. Share it around. Get other people to subscribe. If you enjoyed this video, have a look at this one on my channel or this one on the channel also. You'll enjoy them both. And please subscribe to my mailing list when I'll tell you what I'm up to this year. Live events in the UK, which you can now attend. There's tickets available right now. Click on that. Come see me. Stay free.